report from the Corporate Director for Communities, and that is on the future of waste services and the options for the service post 2026. Janine, please.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Thank you very much, and Cabinet. We have got a fairly lengthy report in front of us this afternoon, and I think for the purposes of the public view as well, that we do need to spend some time on this. So I'm going to apologise in advance, Leader, for that, because I think this is a report that needs the time spent with you this afternoon. So the purpose of the report is to share with you, Cabinet, the findings of the commissioned report from Eunomia Research and Consulting on future recycling and waste options from April 2026. And that is following the 2-year contract that we currently have with Plan B Management Solutions, and that contract ends on the 31st of March 2026. Now, this report also feeds back to you, Cabinet, the recommendations and observations following a scrutiny meeting, Subject Overview and Scrutiny Committee 3, which took place on the 19th of March this year. And this allowed scrutiny members the opportunity to understand the advantages and disadvantages of the 3 service delivery models that the independent consultants, Eunomia, include bringing the waste services back in the waste services or the waste collection into a local authority trading or known as a LATCO, or reprocuring a waste services contract. Now, the scrutiny session was intended to give recommendations for Cabinet consideration and approval regarding those 3 options above. Now, it is important, though, Cabinet and Leader, to note that neither the Eunomia nor this Cabinet report looks at the details of the future service delivery, including items such as frequency of collection or what materials we're going to collect, or even what type of vehicles we're going to use. That is the next stage of the waste services workflow, and that will be brought to Scrutiny Committee 3 and Cabinet for discussion and consideration at a later date this year, and it will be informed by a proposed public consultation exercise that we'll undertake this summer. So a little bit of background to why we are where we are, really. The Council has outsourced its recycling and waste contract to a commercial contractor since 2003. So nearly 19 years now, and the contract has been renewed every 7 years, and the Council has had 3 external contractors fulfil that service to date. Now, prior to this existing Plan B contract, the outsourced waste contract was delivered by Kia Environmental Services, and it had been in place since April 2017. Now, contextually, it's really important to recognise that this has, in the main, been a very well-performing contract. BCBC, we are in the top 3 performing local authorities in Wales for recycling, and we reached over 71% of our waste is recycled, and that's compared to the Welsh Government target currently of 68%. Now, our missed collection rate, which is a national indicator, is under 50 collections missed per 100,000. That's 0.01% of collections are missed. And this is considered exemplar in Wales. And the overall cost of this contract is also considered very competitive compared to other services and stats in Wales. And additionally, the last time this matter was considered by the citizens' panel was back in 2021, and over 76% of respondents at the citizen panels stated that the waste services was good or very good, and a further 13 saying the service was average. 9% of respondents regarded the service as poor or very poor, but these results demonstrate overall the vast majority of our residents regarded the waste service to be good or very good. Albeit, of course, we always recognise that there's areas where we can improve performance. Because this is a very transactional engagement with every household every week, right across the borough. That sometimes we do have a small amount of miscollections, and sometimes there are things we can improve. Now, Plan B Management Solutions is in for that period of 2 years, as I said, and that was approved by Cabinet back in June 2022. Now, Plan B are running that contract with exactly the same vehicles and using exactly the same methodology. And that will run for a 2-year period. Now, to ensure continuity of service post 2026, when the Plan B contract ends, we now need to make decisions on how the council is going to provide waste services in the future. So this could be done, as I've said, by 3 different ways: by reprocuring a service, by bringing the waste service back in-house, or by establishing that council-owned arm's length company, or LATCO. Now, this was the subject of the report presented to the Scrutiny Committee on the 19th of March, and the detailed recommendations are within this report. And I will come to those shortly. But prior to commissioning the Eunomia report, we did give consideration as to whether we should investigate collaborative working arrangements, such as potentially working with other neighbouring local authorities. However, we did explore this at length previously, and there was very limited benefit or very limited interest from our neighbouring authorities, and this is because there was no perceived cost saving or any significant efficiencies, and some of the neighbouring local authorities undertook very different collection methodologies to ours, so it was very difficult to merge the services. So it was decided, therefore, we wouldn't include that as an option in that Eunomia Commission, although this didn't preclude this from being explored further in the future. So let's look at the Eunomia report and talk about that, and then I will come on to the scrutiny recommendations. So Eunomia were commissioned by us, by the council, to undertake a detailed qualitative risk assessment and financial model for the future waste services delivery. And the report that they've produced is included, the full report is included as Appendix A to your pack. Now, this examines the costs and key risks associated with each of the future options. If we look then, if we take a look at the 3 areas, the first area they looked at was risk assessment of the future options that we have. The qualitative assessment involved assessing each of the available future commissioning options against certain criteria. And the criteria that they used is all set out in section 2.1 of the Eunomia report, and it included financial and commercial risk, operational risk, market conditions, implementation risks, service quality, and the control and ability to change. Now, you will see in paragraph 3.3 of the report, there's a word that says error, reference source not found. Actually, that should be in section 2.1 of the report. So I'm not sure why that's there, but that's the amendment to the report in that section, Leader. Now, in summary, from the qualitative perspective, what was found in paragraph 3.4 of your report is that the reprocurement route received the highest score at 66% and was ranked first in terms of mitigating risk. So the higher the score and percentages, the better the option. So the in-house option for waste and the LATCO received very similar scores, and they came second and third. However, the reprocurement option does require some careful consideration. And why I'm saying that is because there's a very limited window in which the contract can be reprocured prior to the 2026 interim contract expiry date. So if the preference of the reprocurement activity is approved this afternoon, then we would need some expediency. Although I would say there may be a number of months. It isn't, when we've examined this with our colleagues in procurement, it isn't, we have to start this immediately. We think there are a couple of months, but it needs to be stopped within a short period of time, I would suggest, rather than pushing this further down the line, Leader. So in 3.4, you can see the reprocurement option was ranked first for as mitigated risks, then the in-house option, then the LATCO. When we looked at the financial modelling, and this detail is all in the report at Appendix 1, but in short, when we looked at the financial perspective, the results of the cost modelling were presented as total annual costs. Now, the baseline figure that was used for the assessment is 7.19 million, and that reflects the budget position in 2022-2023. So then the cost of the contract to the council at that time. So the details of all of this are in section 3.1.2 of the Eunomia report. But in summary, the LATCO option is marginally the cheapest of the three at 9.02 million per annum, though the reprocurement option is only slightly more expensive at 9.03 million per annum. And then the annual cost of bringing the provision in-house, the waste service in-house, is the most expensive by an additional 340,000 per annum. Now, it's worth noting that indexation has been applied to all the future options to account for a start date in 2026. And that's hence why all of the options are higher cost than the baseline, because they reflect that. But the other thing as well to say is this is a model. This is just a modelled scenario. Also, for clarity here, the profit margin applied to the reprocurement option in the model was set at a realistic market expectation of 12%. Now, that's actually higher than the existing contractor receives at 8%. And this could be subject to fluctuation, and that could have a betterment impact on the cost of the reprocurement if the profit margin was lower. Furthermore, the costs of the LATCO option have looked at reflecting best value, and they've been based on the assumption that the terms and the conditions of the employees would not be based on standard local authority terms and conditions and pension requirements. Should that deem to be required and paid, the overall cost of the LATCO option would rise significantly. So if you wanted to pay the local government pension scheme as part of a LATCO model, it would increase the cost by £660,000 a year. And by some distance, that would then become the most expensive model with an annual cost of 9.68 million. It should also be noted that a sickness level of 6% has been applied to all three of the options. However, the council's average sickness rate here in BCBC is at 11%. So if this was modelled into the in-house provision, which is our standard, which is our most recent sickness level, then the costs of the in-house option would rise by a further 250,000 a year. And finally, something I said a little bit earlier, it should be noted that all the options are based on modelling, and therefore the final costs of each may in due course differ, for example, as a result of market conditions. Okay, do you want me to stop there later while you sort the screen?
Apologies to anyone online, but we are having some technical difficulties here in the chamber. I don't know whether experiencing the same technical difficulties are online, but we're just trying to resolve them as we don't have the full screen in front of us. It's been blocked by another
there we
are. Another page, but that's now disappeared. So
thank you, Leader. I will go on to the third section of the report then. So the third section is from 3.10 onwards. It's called transition and mobilisation costs. And in essence, as well as the annual cost of the contract, we have to have the cost of bringing that particular model of service into play. And we need to look at that. All of the detail is in the Eunomia report again. But in summary, it was found that the costs associated with transitioning into a LATCO are the highest at just under £1 million, because in this option, a new business entity is being created, which will require a significant amount of internal support, legal and finance, and other setup costs, such as the development of a business plan, branding, and both the in-house and LATCO options include mobilisation costs that do not apply to the re-procurement, such as terms and conditions, compliant work, and purchase of applications. Now, these two options also require the LATCO and the in-house a high level of resource ahead of the start of the new service delivery, and that will support the transition, including resources for onboarding of the workforce. Now, re-procurement costs, including legal and technical support for the re-procurement process, and other costs such as digital and the depot, apply to all the options. So what we can see here from the costs is that with regard to mobilisation and transition, the lowest cost option is a re-procurement at 529,000. To bring that service in-house is a one-off cost of 765,000, and the LATCO option is the most expensive at just under £1 million. Now, but it's also worth noting, though, that for the in-house and LATCO options, these would literally be a one-off cost once they're brought in, once the LATCO is established. However, for the re-procurement, this cost would incur when the contract expired and needed to be re-procured. However, given the requirement to have continuity of service, preparatory work will need to be commenced with expediency, because all the options will require a significant lead-in time to allow the process to be undertaken and to ensure a sufficient mobilisation period at the end. And there's a provision in the interim contract that we've got currently with the provider Plan B for a 1-year extension, should we require it. However, this would need to be mutually agreed by both parties. Now, the re-procurement option does present the simplest option in terms of council officer involvement and transition. It's a process that the council has considerable experience in, and we've done it on 3 separate occasions over the past 20 years, and it will have much less impact on the roles and capacities of relevant officers across the council. And with regard to that, in particular within our Communities Directorate, we know that we're not resourced in the way that we should be. So there is, however, an unavoidable opportunity cost in pursuing the in-house or LATCO options, as these will require significant internal management resource to be dedicated to the process, both from my directorate, the Communities Directorate, and corporate support departments such as Human Resources, Legal, Finance and ICT. And as such, Leader and Cabinet, this will have an impact on the overall capacity from senior managers in this authority to pursue other initiatives and transformation at a time where we have an overall limited capacity. Now, let me move on to the Subject Overview and Scrutiny Committee from the 19th of March. Now, the Eunomia report and the options was presented to the Scrutiny Committee, and actually representatives from Eunomia came along and joined that meeting and answered the questions. Now, the analysis of the 3 options is, of course, at Appendix A, and we asked them, Scrutiny, to consider what their recommendations were for the Cabinet. Now, the Scrutiny Committee discussed in detail the 3 delivery options in the report and the findings of the report from Eunomia. Now, members were very interested in understanding more about the options of a LATCO. They discussed the ability to create funds within a LATCO and whether an offer of an affordable package of waste collection for businesses could be provided potentially to offer the same pension scheme and terms and conditions as Bridgend County Council staff. So by offsetting the cost with an additional possible revenue stream. Now, members expressed concerns that staff in any LATCO, if they were set up, should not be disadvantaged regarding the local government pension scheme. And further on up in the report, we've just discussed paying, if we did set up a LATCO, if that was your recommendation, it would cost you £660,000 more a year and be the most expensive option if you chose to set that up with a local government pension scheme. So officers would advise that following the scrutiny meeting, Eunomia were then asked to provide some financial information on the performance of existing waste LATCOs in the UK, and that information is in section 3.17 and onwards. And we have discussed this, I know, in a CCMB meeting recently. In terms of a LATCO in Bridgend, this does have a potential to generate income via a commercial waste service, but to make a profit would be very difficult prior to 2030. And the reason for that is that we're in contract for waste disposal with the Materials Recycling and Energy Centre, the MREC, in Neath Talbot. The contract for the period up to 2030 is fixed with high disposal costs, so it'd be extremely difficult for the service to be competitive in this area for the initial 4 years of any proposed contract. There were also queries around the local government pension being available to LATCO employees. Now, Eunomia have confirmed, as earlier highlighted in the paragraph in 3.7, that it would be far more expensive than any of the other 3 options presented, and the cost of the LATCO, should you want to pay the local government pension to those employees, would increase from 9.02 million to 9.68 million per annum. So it takes it from the lowest cost option to the highest cost option, and also it does negate some of the benefits of a LATCO in terms of its ability to match market salaries and operate in a more dynamic and commercial fashion. So officers believe, leader, that you have all the necessary information to make a meaningful decision on the options discussed in the Eunomia report and in our subsequent meetings. Any additional information, while potentially interesting, would be suggestive and not necessarily reflect the service being delivered in this way via a LATCO in Bridgend. The Eunomia Commission has now ended, and the necessary timelines to move this situation on to ensure that we have a waste service in place for April 2026 means that any further delay in making a decision on the future service delivery would represent a significant risk to this authority. All the scenarios modelled by Eunomia, though, have recognised that the preferred option for the procurement of the vehicles is for BCBC to purchase these due to our borrowing ability and the preferential rates that we can gain. And this would also allow us as an authority to move away from the current model of getting an entirely new fleet every 7 to 8 years. So in conclusion, from the detailed qualitative and financial analysis undertaken by Eunomia and from the views of professional officers, it is recommended that the Council and Cabinet considers either the re-procurement or LATCO options going forward, with the re-procurement option appearing to be the most favourable should the timeline for a future procurement be feasible and practical. It is advised at this point, Cabinet, that you accept Officer and Eunomia's recommendation and pursue a re-procurement of the waste service contract post-2026. This is considered both the least cost and risk option in the short term, and this is at a time when, as a local authority, we are faced with pressing financial constraints. Also, when compared to the LATCO option, it would be significantly less demanding on internal resources. Now, from the report provided by Eunomia, there's not a significant difference in the total annual running costs for the service between the re-procurement and the LATCO, but neither the LATCO nor the in-house option are recommended by officers due to the cost and resource implications over a 14-year period, as discussed above. So can I just take you very quickly, Leader, to some financial implications before I take you to the recommendations. So in section 8 of the report, Eunomia very helpfully provided the financial information comparing the 3 service options modelled over a 14-year period. Now, the actual contract period has not been yet determined, but could be based initially on a 7-year contract plus a 7-year option basis. Now, what you can see from this is that the reprocurement and the LATCO over 14 years have a cost of in the region of 127 million, with the LATCO being slightly cheaper than the reprocurement option. However, the mobilisation costs of the LATCO are twice that of the reprocurement, but the risk profile of the reprocurement is significantly lower. There's less risk with a reprocurement. One of the things that I think is quite important to note here, Leader, is the Council's current sickness levels across our organisation. And whilst a figure of 6% is modelled, 11% is more reflective of current in-house figures. It should be noted that using this figure for the in-house option would result in an increased figure on annual total costs, taking those total costs up to 9.62 million. And then if you look at that over 14 years, it would take the cost of an in-house model up to 135 million. This would make that in-house option over £8 million more expensive than a LATCO and 7.91 more expensive than a reprocured option based over a 14-year operating period. So it is important to note that. The move to local authority purchasing fleet on a rolling programme, as outlined in the report, will need financial recognition through investment via the Council's capital programme, which in itself has got significant pressure on it. And whilst not changing the overall future costs of fleet investment required, it would reprofile that spend. Another thing it's important is the affordability of each of these options going forward, given our extremely difficult financial position. It's a crucial factor, really, in determining the preferred option and way forward. We currently have an earmarked reserve of around 300,000 to provide legal and technical support to reprocure the waste contract, and that was based on an assumption that the Council would once again seek to procure a commercial partner. Any additional one-off funding to bring the service in-house or to form a LATCO, where the cost is nearly up to £1 million, would need to be identified, probably from reserves, on a one-off basis, at a time where there is significant pressure on all council funding and where reserves are likely to be reduced significantly to offset our current overspend position. Furthermore, any additional costs to provide the waste contract year on year would need to be the subject of a budget growth bid for the 26-27 financial year onwards. It should be noted that over the course of an initial 7-year contract period from 2026 onwards, the difference in costs between the least expensive option of LATCO and reprocurement compared to bringing the service in-house are between 2 to 3 million. At a time of huge pressure on all council budgets, both revenue and capital, and with projected council budgets unlikely to improve significantly for the foreseeable future, this would require other budget reductions in order to offset those costs, excuse me, should the more expensive option be preferred. So hopefully that has given you some detail. There's an awful lot of detail, Leader, in the Eunomia report itself, but I'm hoping that that would summarise and capture the main points for you. And then I would take you to the recommendations in section 9, Leader. There are 5 recommendations, and it does recommend that you proceed with the reprocurement option, delegate the authority to myself and the Corporate Management Board, agree that a further report will be brought back on the details of the waste collection service prior to any public consultation in the summer, agree that we bring back a subsequent report prior to any procurement, and recommendation number 5 is that note the intent now to move to a new rolling fleet replacement programme for the waste services vehicles from 2024, albeit this will need to go to Council for inclusion in the Council's capital programme. So thank you, Leader. I'll stop there and hand back to you. Thank you.
Thank you for that comprehensive overview of the report. I will bring in Councillor Spanzik first as the Cabinet Member, then the Deputy Leader, then Councillor Good, then Councillor Blundell. Councillor Spanzik, please.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Jean, for taking us through that lengthy report, which is necessary because it is a big decision we're making going forward. And as it's touched on in the report from Eunomia, it's the only service the Council provides that touches every single resident in the county borough, and hence why we need to have this debate and discussion about the best way forward. I accept what the officers are saying and the advice, and based on the Eunomia report, it's a useful report, and it is a report that's valid at the moment in time when it was finalised, which is approximately February 24. And it is based on modelling, which, except that's the best we have before us is modelling, and exactly that's what it is. It's a best estimate, best guesstimate using their experience as to what figures could be. It's not an exact science of what figures will be. And one of the last comments by the director there was that the pre-procurement option is the less cost option in the short term. This is not about the short term, this is about the long term. We are today looking for the long term, where we go with our waste service, which is a good service. And I got to say, it's an excellent performing service. And that's primarily down to the residents of the County Borough of Bridgend who do their bit and take part in our curbside recycling scheme, which works well, down to the public in the majority. So that's again, so I'll say the Eunomia report is valid, but it's valid at the moment in time. And we're now almost 2 months on from when the report was written. And even when it was written, there was high risk identified in there about procurement if we don't proceed quick. In fact, even to the point, I think the final page in the Eunomia report said there's substantial risk associated with the current timeline for procurement, and stating such a timeline could deter contractors from participating. And we're looking at the moment only 5 major contractors in the whole country. So, and even if we were to go agree to this option now for re-procurement, we've yet to start consulting on type of model and frequency of collection that we're looking to do in the county borough. That's not going to happen in a matter of months. I can see that taking the rest of this year to do the consultation process with the public, figure out what our frequency of collections, the type of collections, what are we going to collect, and any other changes that may be coming forward. Again, on re-procurement, because this is about risk, our appetite for risk, and I think there's perhaps more we need to discuss about risks, because there's quite high risks with re-procurement, more than perhaps what's being discussed at the moment. And one of those big risks are, and it is identified within the Eunomia report, is about bids being requested for post-2026 as part of a contract, and how many contractors might seriously be out there that would bid for a contract. The last twice we've gone out to contract, we've been left with only one bidder. We could be back in the same boat again in 26 with one bidder with a large financial risk associated. We wouldn't have any other choice. We would be stuck whatever that cost would be, and that can't be modelled, because who knows what happens to the financial market in the next 2 years and the contractors that are currently in the market. So there's a big risk there, which I'm not sure, and I'm not 100% sure has been fully taken into account when we're talking about risk and financial risk. There's also the lack of flexibility re-procurement. We know almost certainly the Welsh Government targets are going to change in the years to come. Changing any contract is going to have a cost. I'm not sure how you can model that cost or even estimate that cost. And if it's put into a contract up front, contractors are going to weight those costs to take into account the uncertainty with the contract. And also, we're almost certain there will be the deposit return scheme being introduced in Wales in the years ahead. The current Cabinet Secretary has indicated that while England has put it back, Wales does not put this back, and we may well have a deposit return scheme in Wales mid-contract, and there'll be additional costs there. Has that been factored into any modelling? I'm not sure it has. And finally, on the re-procurement option, we should be looking for direct accountability of the service area. It's the one area I said earlier that touches every single person in the county borough, and we need to have direct accountability for that service within BCPC and not through a private company. Turning to the LATCO model, I don't have a major problem with the LATCO model, but I would like a lot more information to understand how an arm's length company would operate from the council, but the council still being 100% financially and legally liable, perhaps, for actions of that body if it wasn't successful. The Eunomia report, it's not actually, it is in the report, I think, but they've given presentations showing examples around the country of other LATCOs. While some of them are making a profit, the profits are reducing. So we need a lot more information of a LATCO running a waste service that is be profitable. We'd like to see that and understand how that would work within Shancounty Borough, the whole democratic and process for that being set up, and how long that would take and how we would do it. It's mentioned, the director mentioned MREC, and we're tied into MREC. That does limit our competitiveness, but that's only for 4 years. So there may be scope after 2030 for a LATCO to be more competitive. And if we seriously look at LATCOs and service provision, we shouldn't perhaps just be looking at refuse. The other part of refuse is street cleansing. It's all one service area, keeping our county borough clean and tidy. So if we're serious, we should be looking at wider scope of what could be part of a LATCO, and that information I would relish to see and understand better. Lastly, on the in-house model, leader, it could well be the way forward, but I'd like to consider both the LATCO and the in-house model further, as per the scrutiny recommendation, pre-cabinet decision scrutiny. And I welcome that view for scrutiny. We'd have direct control of the service and be able better, with lower risk, to respond to Welsh Government changes in legislation and, as stated earlier, the deposit return scheme and any other changes we may wish to make to the service provision. We already own the depots and the machinery and the vehicles, so we're just talking about the staff. And as far as across Wales, I think we are one of only 2 authorities in the whole of Wales that have an outsourced model. So I'm not, and there's many other authorities doing a very good service with in-house service. It can be done. So finally, I welcome again, I say, the pre-decision scrutiny meeting, recommending we look further into LATCO or the in-house, not re-procurement. I believe the re-procurement has high risks and is no further benefit to the county borough as far as we move forward to that. This is modelling, and we do not know the costs, albeit there's lots of costs being given, lots of quite frightening figures given for in-house models, but there could be frightening figures worked out for procurement as well if we were left with one bidder. So finally, Leader, I'd like to move the recommendations that, 1, as in the report, that we note the contents of the report and the quality and financial analysis undertaken by Eunomia, and the officer recommendation the council proceeds. Sorry, I got it wrong. Just note the contents of the report and the quality of financial analysis undertaken by Eunomia. Recommendation 2, that we do not proceed with procurement exercise for a new waste contract post April 26, and the further work be undertaken on the LATCO and the in-house models. 3, that we agree that further report will be brought for cabinet approval on the details of the waste collection service prior to a public consultation the summer of 2024. 4, we agree that a subsequent report be brought for cabinet with more detailed examination of how the LATCO model works in other parts of the country where they're operating a waste service. And finally, 5, note the intent to move to a new rolling fleet replacement programme for waste services vehicles from 24, and this will be through a separate report to council for approval for inclusion in the council's capital programme. Thank you, Leader. I rambled on a bit, a lot there to get through, but be interested to hear other members' views. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Spanzik. I can see the number of hands have been raised, so I'll go to Deputy Leader next.
Thank you very much, Leader. Thank you very much, Councillor Spanzik, for your amendments, which I'm happy to support and second. I think that there's a couple of things that I think I need to reference. And firstly, the only reason that Plan B had the contract was because we were waiting for Welsh Government guidance on the new collection methodology. So for me, we actually have already extended an outsourced contract, waiting for Welsh Government advice that we still haven't had. And actually that would cause further costs to any contract that we would procure, because there would be a change to contract and we know that would incur additional cost. There's something around that you said, Janine, about continuity. My understanding of 2P legislation is that any staff currently serving within the Plan B would be offered 2P protection into our LATCO or in-house, depending on what we were looking at. So I don't think that, and they would be transferred on existing terms and conditions. I think that's important to note. I have noted the concerns raised around the LGPS rather. I've also noted the scrutiny recommendations, and I'm a member of council, and politically I receive the complaints, and I think that's important to note. We're the front face of the council. We are receiving the complaints, the lack of communication, the failure to pick up. There's no flexibility in those arrangements, and I appreciate that Plan B have only just picked up this contract and there may be some teething problems, but it is the same staff. And Kia had regular complaints made about their service, and I'm not disputing how well our Bridgend residents are recycling, because we are best practice and exemplar across Wales in relation to our recycling rates. So I think that's really important, because we have some very conscious residents out there, but actually we have no control over the service. And I think that in the world of public services, I don't think they should be outsourced contracts to private companies. I do think there should be some level of ownership. And I agree that I think we need to have that consultation with the public before we make a decision. I think we need to understand their views and their feelings around collection rates, what we're going to do with residual, how we want to collect our recycling. And I do note that 14 councils in Wales are using the blueprint model. That's not every council in Wales, and I understand there's going to be some discussion about that, and that's quite right and proper. But I do not think that we should be outsourcing and procuring a contract when we don't know what that procurement is going to look like. We still haven't got the advice. And actually, when you look at the costs, these are all modelled costs. Every other council in Wales delivers it within their core budget. I do think we should be in the same position. Thanks very much, Leader.
Thanks for that, Deputy Leader. Next we have Councillor Good, please.
Thank you, Leader. I'm probably going to take a bit of a different tack to colleagues and what has been said so far. I have quite a few concerns really about the direction of travel in terms of this. While I accept that there's absolutely advantages to in-house and to LATCOs, I think ruling out fully a private tender process, I think, is somewhat short-sighted in that, from my point of view, what we should be aiming to do, and I take the Deputy Leader's point about services, absolutely, but from my point of view, our role is to provide the best services we can for the best value for our residents. Now, that shouldn't be led around ideological views or anything else. It should be led on what we know, what information is in front of us. And as far as I can see, the service provided by Kia and now Plan B, as the corporate director has noted, is highly successful in the KPIs that we provide for them. Now, obviously, as with all waste services, people get annoyed when they aren't picked up on time. People get annoyed when sometimes bags spill, and that is completely understandable, completely valid. But the majority of time, the majority of complaints that I've seen myself usually stem from a lack of communication with residents from both, let's face it, BCBC and from our waste providers, to not inform residents when things have gone wrong. And that's the main issue, not so much the service that's being delivered. And it does concern me that we seem to be talking about the report we have from Eunomia as some sort of pie in the sky, finger in the air thing, when modelling is a well-used, well-recognised, globally used way of predicting what things might happen. And yes, it is might happen, but that is how most services are developed. And I want to be very clear, Eunomia is a world-leading global environmental consultancy that has existed for 23 years. Now, I'm not, I don't believe that I therefore can know better than what Eunomia know. It's what they do every day with national governments, with supranational governments, with local governments, and with the private sector. And we can disagree with the direction of travel, but I don't think we can disagree with their expertise. I mean, I know a couple of years ago someone said that the UK was bored of expertise and experts, and look where that got us. So I'm a bit concerned about that, and I must say, while in a perfect world, I think I would like to see in-house services or a LATCO. I think we definitely have to look for new ways of delivering services, because we all know the financial pressures this authority is under, and perhaps LATCOs are the way forward. And I think that could be a really interesting thing, but I don't think it can be interesting or successful solely on the waste contract, particularly if we do have to consider how the terms and conditions will work. And I do think we have to take more time to look at this. You know, I do have a lot of concerns about the financing of this service. I think we have to be very, very clear, both with other elected members and with our residents, that all of these will potentially see more reductions in other services in other areas, because at the end of the day, there is no magic money tree, and we'll have to fund this. That's just a fact. And I don't know, if I was sitting there as a resident thinking about waste, would I want to spend more money for a service that isn't, we aren't saying the service is going to be, you know, every second day or like can be picked up whenever you want. We're saying the service will probably stay the same, and or have a reduction in residual waste collection potentially, depending on what Welsh Government says. So, you know, we could be in a position where we do this, and if I was a resident, it would just seem to me that we're delivering less. I don't think that's what I'd want to see. What I'd want to see is the best service we can deliver for the best price. And I think the majority of people outside of this room would be more concerned to make sure the service is delivered and delivered well than who employed them or who employed those workers. I think that's just something that is inside baseball, really. So, you know, as I say, I have a lot of concerns about this. I think we do need to find a better way forward. I think we do need to explore LATCOs more, and I would welcome us having a wider conversation about LATCOs more generally about services. But I would really struggle to move forward with this, considering where we are currently. But, you know, I'm happy to listen to more conversation with colleagues, and we'll see where we are at the end of the debate. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you for that, Councillor Good. Next, we have Councillor Blundell, please.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I just want to really add into the debate that I think what we've heard so far from Councillor Spanswick, the Deputy Leader, and Councillor Good is we're not ready to make a decision here today on the way forward, whether it be reprocurement, whether it be LATCO, or whether that be in-house model. Because I don't know what a LATCO is going to look like in Bridgend, because we've not got a LATCO in Bridgend. I think we need to have a conversation about that. I think also we're going to have to look at the pros and cons of each one, because whatever happens, if we bring it in-house, we're going to have to bring in officers to manage it, because we hear constantly from the director about the structure in communities is flimsy, to put a colloquialism on it. I think we need to see what that costs. We need to see what the LATCO is going to look like. There are lots of different things. I do have worries about taking it back out to reprocurement. I think we've seen with Kia before, and I won't tar Plan B just yet. They've only had the job 2 weeks, so I'll give them time. When we've raised complaints, the Deputy Leader has said, they go in through the referral system, they go through our systems here in BCBC, and they go off to Kia. Now, we don't see what happens in Kia. We don't see all what used to happen in Kia. We don't see how they're managed, how we don't get, half the time, I don't even get a response back from Kia. I think I've had to close a referral yesterday because it was still outstanding and Kia aren't in charge anymore. So I closed a referral yesterday. So I need to see what the structures were going to look like going forward. I do share Councillor Good's risk about the council's fiscal responsibilities, about the on costs of what all of these could do, because we don't want to be in a position like other councils in England. And so I do have concerns about that. I think also my problems with going out to procurement again would be if the Welsh Government change, which we expect them to change the rules of in our collection and what our percentage of collection rate should be, I think that's going to be a lot harder for us to renegotiate that contract during mid-contract. I think we can put as many breakers into that contract, but there's only so far you can go, because we'll go say we need to look at 75%, and they'll go, actually, no, you need to start looking at 85%. So it becomes a whole different kettle of fish. So for me, I need more information on what a LATCO will look like. I need a bit more information on an in-house model, sort of what the structure is. How many officers are we going to need to be able to run this? Because also we'll have then the problem of recruitment, which is another theme that we've had in other departments and directorates in this council, is a lack of ability to recruit the responsible officers. So for me, I need more information. I'm happy to go along with the Deputy Leader and Councillor Spanswick's recommendation changes, because I need more information, first and foremost, for me, and that's it for me. So thank you, Leader.
Thank you for your contribution and the contribution of all members so far. I think it's been a very healthy discussion that we are having. Councillor Williams is next, please. Councillor Williams, we can't hear you. And we still can't hear you. Shall we? What I'll do, I'll bring a colleague in, Councillor Williams, and then I'll try and return to you when hopefully we've addressed the IT problem. It looks like we've got. Thank you, Councillor Williams, if that's okay. Councillor Farr next, please.
Thank you, Leader. My colleagues have said most of what I wanted to say, but I want to say that I support the amendment put forward by Councillor Spanswick and the Deputy. I would also want to have more information on what in-house service looks like and LATCO. It's like Councillor Blundell said, we need to know what the structure is. On staffing, if we did go to in-house or LATCO, my understanding is that the staff from Plan B would be moved across, so they wouldn't have that much issue of staffing because they would be TUPE'd across to in-house or LATCO. We spoke about the local government pension. I just wanted to ask Janine, will the staff who would be TUPE'd across to whether in-house or LATCO, do they automatically go on the local government pension, or do they have the option to opt out? So that would be my question, and I would support us exploring in-house and LATCO more, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Farr. I can see that Councillor Williams has his hand back up, so we'll see if we can hear Councillor Williams this time. Councillor Williams, please. We heard something, but it was very faint, unfortunately, Councillor Williams. Do you want to try again? Just.
I've tried to phone in now, but can you hear me?
We can hear you, but it's not as clear as we'd like it to be. So perhaps if you could speak a little bit louder, then hopefully we'll hear you. So do you want to make a start then, please?
Well, I've got a couple of comments on the actual report itself, and that because I know the report, and Councillor Spanswick has mentioned, the report is based on modelling. I noticed that the financial modelling actually shows that a LATCO being the most cost-effective option, but I just want to understand the risk modelling, because there is a 10-point difference there in the risk. So I'm just wondering what the analysis has been afforded to that, because that is quite some margin there. But you know, what are the margins of error, I suppose, around that? Regarding the amendment, I think it is incumbent upon us to challenge business as usual, and I think the recommendation basically recommends business as usual. Now, for some time, we've been talking about a new model, a new way of working, and I think when a key contract, like the waste contract, comes to an end or approaches its end of its life, then that's a golden opportunity for us to consider new and innovative ways of looking. So I really do think that we should take this opportunity to look at best practice for LATCO and see if we can use a model which will work well for Bridgend residents. So that's where I am on this, leader. I'm not really sure if we need to rule out re-procurement at this point, but I mean, I'll take the advice of officers on that. But I really do think we need to have a much closer look at the LATCO option, because the report tells us that the LATCO is the most cost effective. And given the financial situation that we're in at the moment, we really do have a duty to consider the most cost effective means of service provision.
Thank you for that, Councillor Williams. And actually on that point, because I think Councillor Good is absolutely right to flag up our financial position and the financial challenges we face. I have to say I was surprised at the financial modelling and and that there wasn't a difference, a bigger difference, and that in that financial model, actually the LATCO option is ranked first, and that's certainly a factor for me. Though I accept all the points that have been made, I accept the points that it is a model, but I think as Councillor Spanzik has described it as a model, and of course those assumptions will never be 100% correct. But I also think that the Councillor Good has made a very important point around, the organisation that has provided this is a very experienced international organisation, and that organisation has given us some financial modelling, and that financial modelling it wasn't as I anticipated it to be. Councillor Williams, is that a new hand, or is that a hand that you right? Okay. So I'll bring in the Deputy Leader next, please.
Thanks very much, Leader. As the conversation's gone on, I do have some further contributions to make, and one of those is around the Social Partnership Act, which we now have to show due regard to. And I don't believe that we have shown due regard in relation to this process either. I would ask how trade unions have been involved in this discussion, because I do think that they should be involved, and I think that's lacking at the minute. And you also referenced the MREC, Janine. Oh, there was feedback then. That was a bit weird. You also referenced the MREC, and if we re-procure, if we go out to re-procurement, then we have limited ourselves with any opportunity to income generate from this arrangement come 2030 straight away, because we won't have that option to do that. So I appreciate that we would be limited till 2030, but I do think that's something, and it's an investor save model for the future. And I appreciate officers' diligence in advising us. What I would say, however, is that the only reason that councils outsourced any of our services initially was to save costs. That was the only reason Bridgend outsourced our refuse collection. It wasn't so that we had any ownership over it. It was specifically to save costs at the time. And I can see that Mark's shaking his head over there. So I'm assuming that he's in charge, and I'm assuming that as the old communities director, you were involved in that at the time. No? It was well before that. All right, okay. But that's the only reason we outsourced services, and that's the only reason that other councils did LATCOs, was because they could save some money. But I think we need some control over it, and I am quite happy to take that risk in relation to a LATCO. Thanks very much, Leader.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. I think there is that issue around service quality and continuity as well, and I think possibly that was a reason. But whether it was or not, I suppose that was a very long time ago now, wasn't it? And life and the world has moved on from that. But I do think it's important that we have a focus on service delivery in whichever model we choose, because that is very important, isn't it? We want a service that's reliable, and we want a service that has the lowest level of missed collections. So that's not to say we will ever deliver a service that will have no missed collections. We literally make, is it millions of collections every year, Janine, across the county borough? And I don't think there's a waste service in the UK that doesn't have some missed collections for various reasons. So it is about, it's a decision we need to make. You're right, it can't just be about cost. It needs to be about quality as well. And my contribution, for what is worth, is that whichever option we pursue, we have to do as much preparation as we can now to make sure that that option is as successful as it can be. And it does require that we make a timely decision. I suppose I'm looking at the corporate director on that. So if we are going to look further at two options, and that would be my view, I think we need to do that quickly without rushing it, get as much information that we can, that we need, and then make that decision. So whichever option we pursue, we have as much time as possible to mobilise, because that mobilisation, it takes time, doesn't it? And it takes resources and it takes expertise that we do not currently have for any of those options, actually. And the mobilisation is about mobilising those resources. I can see that Councillor Blundell wants to come back in, and then I will bring Councillor Spanzik, please, unless officers wanted to respond specifically to any of those points. You are collectively, is it? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Blundell, please.
Yeah, thanks. Something I remissed in going over my notes, something I missed from what I should have said, is that I also think that LATCO could provide a blueprint for a new model, a new way of working for this council with some other parts of this council. I think, don't want to use it as a guinea pig, of course not, but it could provide a way forward in providing services better in a different way. So I think it's worth exploring even further the LATCO, just to see what it will entail, to see if it could be rolled out to other parts of the council as well. That was just to add on that bit that I missed from my notes there.
And I think that's a really important point, certainly for me, that we have some services, other services potentially delivered by partners or delivered by the private sector that we may want to consider in the future. But we also have in-house services that we directly manage at the moment, and they are struggling to deliver those services because of serious and long-standing recruitment challenges. For example, in the Communities Directorate, and this may be an opportunity for us to provide a more sustainable way of delivering some of those services. I don't think it's any secret that the corporate landlord function currently at the moment is struggling with recruitment, and it may be that we consider that alongside some of the other services that Councillor Spanzik has spoken about. So I'll bring Councillor Spanzik in on that point, at that point, and on that point, if he wants to come in on that point around the potential functions of a LATCO. Councillor Spanzik.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. And that is something we do need to understand in a lot more depth. What services could be part of a LATCO, and that might not be all in one go. There may be a plan over many years how our LATCO could work and develop and expand, and that's part of the information we need to have and understand better. But the reason I want to come back, I forgot the point, and I would like to stress the point. There's some really good, valid points made by everybody, and it's good to have this discussion and debate, move forward. The one point I was a little bit disappointed was on sickness. Except it's not easy to bring sickness levels down. We have 11 to 12% sickness level in Bridgend, and the report states that the current service provides 6% of the Kia or Plan B. But why should we automatically assume the sickness will increase to 12% just because it would be an in-house model or even LATCO? We should be doing the opposite. We should be striving for 6%. So there's a whole issue for the future report, future discussions, totally separate matter, on performance management, sickness management. So if we're accepting the fact that, okay, so we're going to accept 12%, well, we need to start thinking again, because we need to challenge our sickness management and bring those levels down. I'm not saying 6% is easily achievable, but it is achievable if it's happening currently with that service provider. So let's keep that for another day, but it's disappointing to automatically accept 12% sickness levels.
Okay, thanks for that, Councillor Spansic. I think it was just more about that. Of course, we'll always be striving, won't we, to tackle sickness. I think it was just about making an assumption, I suppose, you've got to about what the cost will currently be. But you're absolutely right, Councillor Spansic. That's an aim of us all, isn't it, to reduce sickness for the benefit of our workforce as much as anything else, isn't it? To make sure that they are well and to make sure that they're in work and to protect their long-term futures as well. Okay, so we've had a set of amendments to the recommendations that have been moved, I do apologise, Janine. See, I was looking at hands. I didn't deliberately miss you out. I will, of course, bring the Corporate Director for Communities back in before we move to a resolution of this. My apologies. Janine, please.
No, not a problem, Leader. It's been a fairly lengthy afternoon, hasn't it, so far? Yeah, so a couple of points from me, really, then, I've been listening to the debate here. When we talk about the staffing, what would a LATCO look like? What would an in-house model look like? In fairness, all of that detail is already in that Eunomia report and costed. So the detailed structures are in there and what they would cost are in there. Those things are there. So with regard to getting more information on a LATCO or in-house, I'm not sure I can give you more information than what is already there. I can probably look for more examples of successful LATCOs around the UK. Yes, but with regard to the staffing and the cost of that is already there. So really, what I need to be very clear about when we walk away from this report today, when we get to recommendations, is exactly what additional information you require, because a lot of what you've asked for is in the report. Also, the timescales on this are very tight, and you've acknowledged that, Leader. This isn't. I recognise you want additional time to think and more information, but this is a decision that is imperative we make in the coming months, really. So let me come back, if I may, to a couple of the points that have been raised. So one of the things that Councillor Farr asked was about details of LATCO staff, and that's all in the report, but also what would happen if staff were TUPE'd over into a LATCO. Well, they would be TUPE'd on their existing terms and conditions. So they come over as is, and they are protected by law as is. One of the questions that Councillor Williams asked was, what is the margin of error around the risk piece that Eunomia have in this report? And of course, what I would say here is that we may not agree with the risk assessment, or you may not agree with the assessment and the values they've put in there, but at the end of the day, Eunomia are a specialist consultancy on waste, and these are their opinions. All of the detail of the risk and how they have come to those decisions, the detail of that is all contained in that Eunomia report. How they've built up the cost and why they've done it, around the risk piece in particular. And one of the points that was made by Councillor Williams was that the LATCO is the lowest annual cost. Yes, it is marginally the lowest annual cost, but it has the highest transitional and mobilisation cost itself. So whilst it may only be slightly the same cost as the cost of a reprocurement, its transition and mobilisation cost is much larger. It's twice the amount. It's nearly £1 million. But one of the things I think that was important is that we haven't spoken a great deal about risk today and about the transfer of risk, because one of the things in this report is that the risk profile of a reprocurement is much, much lower. And that's because a reprocured service, they carry the risk. For instance, they carry the risk of covering sickness. They carry the risk of anything to do with industrial relations. Let me go back to sickness for a minute, because I think when that contract went out in 2004, the average sickness of the waste staff at that point in time was 23%. And there were also some issues with industrial relations at that point. Now, I can't comment any further. That was 20 years ago, nearly 20 years ago. But there was a reason for some of those decisions, and I don't think it was just based solely on cost. There were some issues with how that service was being delivered. So if we did reprocure, they would cover the risk of sickness. They would cover the risk of industrial relations. For instance, in Cardiff, currently, we've had the in-house waste contract. Cardiff Council have been on strike since last September. They've been on strike for 8 months. So there's a skeleton waste service in Cardiff. These are things in reality that will happen. And if the service is brought in-house or a LATCO, that we will have that risk. The third risk is breakdown of vehicles, and we know that has happened, and a rolling fleet replacement will assist us, but whereby we've had Kia and Plan B have to afford the cost and take on the breakdowns and to rent vehicles, bring vehicles in, all of that risk transfers back to us as a council. So these will impact on the cost of that in-house model and or any LATCO. So whilst we have understood about the financial risk, we also have to look at the other risks around performance and weigh them up. Now, some of the ratings that have been given by our colleagues in Eunomia are there for your consumption, and that's their professional opinion. Of course, you may have a very different opinion, and you are entitled to have that. But at this stage, that is their professional opinion. So there was some talk around the MREC, and us being in that contract until 2030. We are, so we wouldn't be able to look at the material recycling in any LATCO until after that point, but that's a 4-year period, and this is a long-term contract. We would be able to generate income if we did want to, by possibly some commercial waste services we could look at. And the other thing with a LATCO is there are other parts of this council that could sit within it. For instance, the leader mentioned the corporate landlord services. It is in LATCOs in other areas, and we could possibly look at that in the future. That is something that I have discussed with the manager there. This is very early discussions, but it could be. When we look at the mist collection rate, let's make this very clear here. It is exemplar in Bridgend. The mist collection rate with that Kia contract is very, very, very low. It was 50 per 100,000. That's less than 0.1% of collections. The millions and millions of collections that go on are missed. Now, don't get me wrong. It's very inconvenient when your collection is missed, but the service is exemplar in that regard and one of the best performance services in Wales. So it would be very hard to improve on the mist collection rate there. And I think that probably is answered some of those questions there, Leader. This is an important debate for you to have. But I think what was equally important for us is for us to understand if you don't want to go with the recommendations from Eunomia and officers, I totally understand that. But I need to be very clear for us as officers what additional information you are now looking for. And are you ruling out that procurement at this stage? Because I'm not quite sure where the debate got to with that option. You're saying that the recommendation is you don't want to go with our recommendations, but where are we moving forward, please? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Janine. I'll bring in the Deputy Leader first, and then Councillor Spancer, please.
Thank you very much, Leader. I was intent on finding a bit of information while I've been sitting here, so I found it. And one of my biggest reasons for refusing this isn't around finances. It's around the flexibility of the service, which I've referenced before. And I've got a report here from BCBC. It's from 2011, and it's the draft Municipal Waste Management Strategy. And it goes back to how we established the services in 2003, what we did. And I'll give you one of the last comments in this strategy was, bear with me a second, the current range of waste management services provided by the council is almost unrecognisable from that which existed 10 years ago. But because it was outsourced, it cost us money. During this period, a number of significant developments affecting recycling, treatment and disposal of the council's waste has been introduced, which are outlined below. All of that had an impact on our contract at the time. And the report references back to 2003 when we actually we made the decision, council made the decision to outsource services. They gave a complete methodology as to part of that report. And actually the overview in 2011 was the council was unrecognisable, and part of that was due to the council's waste, the treatment and oh God, can't even put my teeth back in now. So it's about the significant developments around Welsh Government guidance. I'm quite happy to share this with you because I think it's relevant, Janine. For me, I think we need to look at ALATCO. I fully understand why people don't want to insource. I appreciate our financial restrictions, but ALATCO, according to our independent consultants, yes, it's only marginally cheaper, but it is cheaper, and we still retain control of that scenario. So for me, I think we need to look at ALATCO. And I'm saying that because whilst the discussion here this afternoon has been around the LGPS, and that's the reason that we don't want to go down the LATCO, everybody would be tupied into that LATCO under existing terms and conditions. They would not need to change at that point. I think that's something for the future. I also agree with other Cabinet colleagues' conversations. I think this is something we're going to review for other service areas. I think the LATCO needs to be set up so that we're able to put additional services in there should we need to. Thanks very much, Leader.
Thank you for that, Deputy Leader. And I certainly think, Janine, on that point around the potential of additional services being delivered through the LATCO is one that I would certainly welcome more information about. Councillor Spanzik is next, please.
Thank you, Leader. I wasn't thinking of coming back, but I would just to come back on 2 points raised by the Director, just to be clear, because I think the Director made a comment that we haven't talked enough about risk. But one of the first comments I made was referring to the UNOME report, and they identified a substantial risk associated with the current timeline for procurement. That's one of the first things I pointed, substantial risk. So that has been discussed as one of the reasons why I think we shouldn't proceed in that direction. And also, I just mentioned about the LATCO not being that much different, cheaper. It is actually cheaper than procurement. And there's one-off costs, but they are one-off costs. Re-procurement as recurring costs every several years to re-procure. So LATCO, one-off costs, re-procurement, recurring costs. And just to be clear, I would like to perhaps read out my proposal again, amendments, just to be clear, because
I think that was useful for everyone. Councillor Spanzik, thanks for that.
Okay, right. So I recommend the Cabinet. So point 1, note the contents of the report and the qualitative and financial analysis undertaken by UNOME and the officer recommendation. Oh, sorry, I'm reading the actual report now. I'm sorry, let me get the right one. Trying to be good and right. Note the contents of the report and the qualitative financial analysis undertaken by UNOME. 2, that we do not proceed with the procurement exercise for a new waste contract post April 26, and that further work be undertaken on the LATCO and in-house models. Agree that a further report will be brought for Cabinet approval on the details of that waste collection service prior to a public consultation in the summer of 2024. Agree that a subsequent report will be brought for Cabinet with more detailed examination of how the LATCO model works in other parts of the country where they're operating a waste service. And finally, at 5, note the intent to move to a new rolling fleet replacement programme for waste service vehicles from 2024. This will need to be through a separate report to Council for approval for inclusion in the Council's capital programme. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Yeah, of course. Janine, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Leader. And apologies, Councillor Spanswick, without having those in front of us, it's kind of difficult to go through. But I think I've got it, because one of them, I believe you said, do not proceed with the procurement. So one of the recommendations is that. So today we are ruling out the procurement.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I can't either. The actual, it's only items 2, so 1, 3 and 5 are as per the report. Well, it's item 2 is we do not proceed with procurement exercise in any waste contract post April 26 and the further work we haven't taken on that going in-house models. And then 4, I can send a copy through. I have sent a copy earlier, but I can send another one to get it correct.
Please, could you? And there's a couple of other comments from me as well, Leader, here, is within the report, we have got a 300,000 EMR for this work. And of course, this additional work now is going to take at least, some of that money, plus the cost of setting up a LATCO is in the region of 970,000. So we will need to identify a revenue stream for an allocation for this work going forward. That's the first thing for me. And then, of course, the second thing will be, I can probably take it offline, the exact details, what we're asking for a LATCO, because a lot of the information about setting up the LATCO is in the Eunomia report, in staffing and costs. But I think one of the things that I gleaned from this was about governance and how it would respond back to the council and report back to the council. So there's that piece.
So whilst you do that, on the LATCO option, I think we've discussed, haven't we, the possibility of additional services being delivered by the LATCO. That obviously wasn't primarily the concern of this report, because it was specifically focused on waste options. But if we are to consider that, and I think there's a willingness for us to consider that, there does need to be some additional information about the pros and cons of that, because actually that would, and this is what we need to understand, would that mean that there are further benefits to us from having a LATCO if it was responsible for some of those other services, and therefore the fixed costs of setting up a LATCO are spread over different services? But I would want to understand that before making a final decision, particularly given, as has been described, the marginal difference between some of the options there, and that's something that I think would be helpful to us as members, and something I would certainly like to see, and also in terms of that risk, I think both you and the cabinet member have rehearsed very well that there are risks in both regards, aren't there? I mean, I certainly would say that in recent years, I have seen that us go into the market does, in some respects, carry greater risk, because a lot of markets now are much more volatile in terms of their costs. They're not as stable as they once were, just because of the way of the world and the fact that quite often businesses are in less competitive environments. That means that some of the predictions that we're making are not always realised around markets and what they would. For me, that is a factor that we need to weigh up with. Again, there's different types of risks of bringing a service in the house or a LATCO. So I think their point's well made by both you and the cabinet member. I can see that Councillor Williams wants to come in, so I will bring Councillor Williams back in, please. William, I can't hear you. Perhaps if you try again.
Can you hear me?
Can hear you loud and clear now, Councillor Williams. We can't see you, but we can hear you, and I'll settle for hearing you at the risk of... No, we can see you now as well as a very bright light.
Just
Williams, please.
right now, I'm supporting the amendment on the financials because, and in regards to the extra information we need or the further information, I suppose, you know, we're going to set up a LATCO in the best way possible, but there are differences in the LATCO, which are shown in the report. The best performing LATCO makes 2.8 million profit. So I want to understand, well, why is that a very profitable LATCO then? No, the Liverpool option is obviously a wider option. It makes a loss of 1.6 million, but so a quick search of Liverpool's budget is 1,500 million budget. And it's a massive budget compared to Bridgend, and it can run its services at 1.6 million. So I'm sure that we really do need to understand the differences between the different LATCOs.
Okay, thank you for that, and that's a piece of work again. I'm sure, Janine, we can undertake. I think that's important to understand, and I know we will do that. And also then there's the wider point around that we've made around the governance arrangements for the LATCO, because actually you've heard today a very strong argument made by members about greater control. But so we need to understand how the LATCO, because to a degree, there is greater control, but also it's not the same level of control as in-house. So understanding that governance arrangements, I think, would be particularly helpful. Again, I know that's something that was raised in the Scrutiny Committee, and I'm mindful of the Scrutiny Committee's recommendations as well. And I know they discussed this in great depth at the meeting. So I know we've had a very full and frank discussion, and I've got every confidence in our officers. I know that they'll take this away and bring it back, and we can make the progress that we need and will make, I am sure. So recommendations the recommendations as amended have been moved. They have been seconded. Is everyone in agreement, please? Okay. Thank you very much, colleagues, and thank you very much, Janine, and to the team. I know how hard they work, and I know they will make these options, as you always do, make these options work. And of course, we'll receive a further report, or rather, Cabinet will receive a further report, reports on the progress of this. And now we have the third report, the Corporate Director for Communities, and that. Right, I've had a request for a break, so we will have a break, and it will be a 5-minute comfort break. It will not be a 10-minute, it'll be a 5-minute comfort break. Okay, thank you, colleagues.